Welcome to the 9th Summer Solstice season from First Presbyterian Church, Salina. I'm Martha Ray, co-coordinator of the series with Sydney Soderberg. This year's Summer Solstice looks at the aftertime of our year with COVID, with its separating lockdowns and paralyzing political polarity. How do we move forward? How do we open to our new normal? How do we begin to actively and intentionally heal, both individually and in community? Bringing together speakers from across the country, as well as a few local favorites, we explore this year's theme, moving to higher ground, the need for healing. Today is the second in the series, Artistic Practice as a Response for Healing. It is moderated by Dr. Paula Fried. Paula is a clinical psychologist in private practice in Salina for many years. During that time, she's also been involved in numerous and varied community projects and often in a leadership capacity. On a personal note, she is a seasoned cook whose culinary skills are enjoyed widely, and she is actively interested in supporting local producers. Today's panel members are Shin-hee Chin, Kevin Iega Jeff, and Saralyn Reece Hardy. They will be introduced by Dr. Fried. And finally, do remember that there are two options for participation in this year's series, online and in person. Visit the church's website, fpcsalina.org, to learn more. And now, welcome.
Welcome to the second session in the 2021 Summer Solstice series, Moving to Higher Ground, Practices for Healing. This theme was chosen in response to the forces of isolation and polarization that have been intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic and heightened by the last presidential election. These twin forces of isolation and polarization have reinforced old divisions and revealed new ones, creating fatigue, anxiety, uncertainty, and fear for many people. We may feel uneasy even in our own homes, among friends, at work, and in our institutions when contested issues come up, like politics or even vaccinations. Today, we continue exploring how we move forward together, how we work to actively and intentionally heal, individually and collectively. How do we knit together the tears the past year has created or revealed? How do we integrate body, mind, and spirit to allow for deeper levels of knowing? How do we grieve and acknowledge our losses, tell our separate stories together? We are very fortunate to be joined by three people who bring a deep understanding of the transformative power of the arts to help us as we continue our journey. Art can provide a window into ourselves, an opportunity to learn or know something in a new way, the possibility of understanding our current circumstances with a new awareness. I am delighted to introduce our three panelists and hear and see what they have to share with us today. I'd like to welcome Shin-hee Chin. Professor Chin is a fiber mixed media artist and professor in the visual art department at Tabor College in Hillsborough, Kansas. Shin-hee's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including Washington, D.C., Tokyo, Geneva, Taiwan, Seoul, and at the Salina Art Center. Shin-hee draws from feminist traditions, Christian spirituality, and Eastern philosophy in creating work that explores the humanity and the divinity in human beings, highlighting interconnectedness. She has lived half of her life in South Korea and half in the United States, and this immersion into very different cultures is reflected throughout her work. Her art reflects a long-standing interest in reconciling contradictions and paradoxes. Shin-hee says that she sees the act of sewing by hand as a process of joining two elements without sacrificing the integrity of each individual element, precluding any hierarchy. Welcome, Shin-hee. Saralyn Reece Hardy is also with us. She is the Marilyn Stockstead Director of the Spencer Museum of Art at the University of Kansas. She has also served as Director of Museums and Visual Arts at the National Endowment of the Arts and was the director of the Salina Art Center for nearly 2 decades. She's known as a visionary who inspires large-scale and dramatic innovations and renovations, and who has stimulated new ways of thinking about cultural institutions, both large and small. She is also known as a collaborator guide who facilitates very intimate understandings and connections with works of art. Saralyn says that when we bring sustained attention and deliberate focus, works of art can penetrate memory, summon associations, shift assumptions, and prompt new creative expressions. Welcome, Saralyn. And we're so fortunate to have Kevin Iega Jeff with us. Iega is a dancer, choreographer, educator, and co-founder of the Deeply Rooted Dance Theater in Chicago. Iega has taught and lectured nationally and internationally, and he is intensely involved in the artistic and cultural life of Chicago. He's had a long relationship with our community here in Salina, and he and Deeply Rooted Dance Theater have been here many times. He is known for his clarity of purpose, his innovative leadership, and his ability to grow the capacity of others. Iega says that watching dance can awaken us and create attunement to feelings that allow us to dissect internal narratives that can reshape our lives. Welcome, Iega.
Thank you.
So you can see we just have a wonderful group with us here, and I'd like now to ask each of them to tell us a little bit about themselves and show us their work. And I'd like to ask Shin-hee to get us started.
Thank you, Paula, for nice and kind introduction. Thank you for inviting for the panel members for Soul-Stice 2021. I am deeply honored. Next slide, please. Last year, I had an honor to have a solo show entitled Mother Tongue, Motherhood, and Transculturalization at Salina Arts Center in conjunction with the University of Kansas, the Spencer Museum of Art Outreach Project, Shattering the Void. Next, please. Culture context has most shaped my work as I spent half my life in South Korea and the other half in the United States. My work reflects the binary nature of the words such as East and West, art and craft, yin and yang, faith and secular world, etc. All those paradoxes inhabit in the same space, just as Korea and America coexist in me. My worldview has been shaped by experience as a woman, a mother, and an immigrant. Next, please. In my years of dealing with the issues of bicultural lifestyle, art has helped me reconcile the conflicting nature of two different cultures. Intertwined is a small, round shape that is stuffed and stitched into the form of sphere. It transformed the traditional two-dimensional shape of yin and yang into a three-dimensional object, which enables viewers to see the continuous dynamics and movement. Next, please. My faith stands in the center of my art. I see the world through the lens of faith that expresses many of the core values of a Christian tradition: salvation, reconciliation, community, and peace. I try to make a connection between my art and faith into the understanding of God's favor on those the world has marginalized. Next, please. My ongoing series of work explore humanity and dignity in human beings, highlighting the interconnectedness. My work seeks to valorize the small tasks that together yield a greater sum in positive energy, yet are overlooked or dismissed by history. Also, my work seeks to acknowledge the trials endured by victims and minorities. On the left side is Nadia Anjuman. She found her poetic voice months before her death in 2005 by publishing her first book, Dark Red Flowers. She met secretly with other Taliban women to read banned books under the guise of a sewing circle. Her silent face speaks for oppressed women behind the veil. And Frank is on the right side. Next, please. People of the Wind is the collection of various portraits of Native Americans created by random stitching. By choosing green tones, I emphasize the nobility of the Native American, the hardship they have endured, as well as the green prairie grasses of their surroundings. I use grass as a metaphor for humans in general. Next, please. I have portrayed the victims of human tragedies. September 11, which contains 1910 ballpoint ink portrait of people, is based on the photos in the book Portrait of Grief, published by New York Times in 2002. This work commemorates the people whose life was destroyed. Next, please. Now I'm showing 240 pieces of mixed media collage installation. My inspiration came from the poem One Night I Count the Stars, 별 해는 밤, by Korean poet when he was in exile. Next, please. The text is used each piece as a symbol of a mother tongue that is so fundamental in the fabric of one's being. I used to emphasize the critical role language and a system of discourse play in contemporary culture in defining, dividing, and connecting people. Next slide, please. My soul magnifies the Lord. As the title suggests, the work is inspired by the marriage song in the Gospel, Luke, chapter 1. I received the fellowship from Nagel Institute at Calvin College. This gave me the opportunity to travel to China. Next, please. The work is composed of 24 panels, in which panel depicts a pregnant woman. The whole work is a metaphor for the female body from which new life emerges, suggesting the stillness and waiting in the presence of the Creator. Next, please. Last year, when we all had been placed sort of a quarantine due to widespread COVID-19, I felt so sad and frustrated as many people were dying and we couldn't do anything but watch the numbers of the deaths. At the time in my basement, I discovered one of my friends who deceased weavers leftover fabrics in a box. I washed them individually by hand and flat dried them. I sorted them by colors. That's what I could do. Next, please. During pandemic, also George Floyd protests started. When I observed the phenomenon, I thought about making artwork about Black lives and Black culture. I intentionally use color scheme, red, black, and green. They are the colors of Pan-African flag designed by Marcus Garvey in 1920 and intended as an expression of a Black liberation. When I post this process on Instagram, I and users had a conversation about topic in more harmonious way. In that sense, I see art as a tool of a mutual understanding. And happy Juneteenth Day. Next, please. During the time, I heard that my mother was in the hospital for her heart surgery in California. All through the night, I frantically began stitching to overcome my fear while praying for my mother's surgery went well. The surgery went well, and then the second and third is the one that I keep on stitching. And the next slide, please. Finally, my work entitled The End and the Beginning contemplates on the true meanings of life, humanity, and harmony. My work emerges from the pain and chaos of a broken world. While I was working on it, I added green elements as a blade of grass. The green grass as a symbol of hope. Thus, this piece does not speak so much of pain, sorrow, or absurdity of life, but rather of healing, covering, renewedness, and the inner joy of life. Next, please. When I had a chance to have a tall grass artist residency at Flint Hills, I started to make 4 tall grass series. Big blue stem, Indian grass. Next slide, please. switch glass, and a little blue stem. My works are an homage to the plebeian class, a way of giving voice to the plight of those who were powerless in the face of larger political forces. My intention is also to show my appreciation of the people and grassroots movement. Each individual thread, like a blade of grass in the field, is an integral piece of a quilt. Each human life on their own narrative, but regardless of their courses, these lives are contributions to history, the greater story of humanity. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to share my new piece, A Splendor in the Grass, at the School of Medicine Salina campus, University of Kansas. It sets out to explore the beauty of prairie grasses, highlighting cultural and etheric roots in rural Kansas. The work is imbuing the landscape with a spirit resonance and honoring people, history, and land of Kansas. Next, please. I'd like to finish this presentation by quoting Maya Angelou's poem, Human Family, which explores the connection between people around the globe and ultimately concludes that we are more alike, my friends, than we are unlike. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Oh, thank you, Shin-hee, for that beautiful presentation. Yes. Wonderful to see your work and hear you talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Saralyn, would you be willing to go next and share your work with us?
Shin-hee, thank you. When you showed that intertwined ball, I thought that's all I needed for my introduction. If I could just call that back, that would be so perfect. And I too am really honored to be here today with the four of you. All of you I respect so much. And some of the introduction of that ball is that I feel my life has been very interconnected with Salina, and the way that you talked about being in Salina and knowing that this is primarily a Salina audience, I feel very much like that. But we'll go to my first slide because that is where I am now. But I consider myself a citizen of Kansas, and oops, nope, back. Yep, right there. Thank you, Keith. Right there. But I am the director of an art museum. And that was also what I did in Salina. I was very honored to be the director of the Salina Art Center, and I am equally honored to be the director of the Spencer Museum of Art. But instead of giving you a historical view of me, I have decided to just bring up a couple of contradictions that my life has been encountering of late. And they both have connections to my history and my future. So the Spencer Museum of Art is stuffed with art. It's stuffed with art from all places and all times. It's the only comprehensive art museum in Kansas. So on any given day, I can wander in and look at an old piece of Roman glass, or I can look at a brand new work by a Native American artist. So it is the kind of place that keeps me in constant question about my own identity. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm bringing you two artists in addition to the two that you get to hear from directly, because both of these artists for me have brought up the contradictions and the oppositions that occur in our culture when there is no one way to see things, that there are always multiple stories, multiple prismatic stories that bring forward different kinds of truths, and where we have all been isolated and in some ways fearful I think that it's the intertwining of those stories that can actually bring us together. So I'm showing you an installation view of the exhibition that closed during the pandemic. And this is called Staging Shimomura. It is by an internationally known artist, Roger Shimomura, who lives in Lawrence, but is very well known internationally. But Roger spent his growing up years in an internment camp. And before I go to one of those story images of his, I just want to acknowledge that the exhibition that we did was all about his performance work that is not well known, because it's more like his studio work. It's more the kind of thing that not many people saw, that was the preparatory material for these finished works of art. And as I think about isolation, and at least for me, the pandemic became a time that I prepared myself for a slightly new life. And I wanted to show Staging Shimomura and the Superman, especially, that is hanging there, that doesn't look like it's an art object, but is actually something that Roger used to make fun of the normative way we like to see white male culture. And, you know, do we all have to be Superman? So Roger brought that up in a really interesting way. So next slide, please. But his most well-known work has this motif of the barbed wire. And this is Roger's childhood in the internment camp. All of these paintings are made from stories from his grandmother's diary, intertwined with his own memories. And I think particularly these stories lodge in a way that is difficult to tell, but easy to see, that you can see the innocence of childhood and this looming background of the barbed wire. So this is a World War II memory, whereby, let's see, the number here, over 120,000 West Coast persons of Japanese ancestry had to leave their homes and their jobs behind and were forced into 10 prison camps across the western part of the United States. Next slide, please. This is our World War II, which we believe we won. Another work that we have that had in that exhibition was an installation work, which is called Relocation Luncheon. And in this one, it was a place where people would come to share their lunch inside the camp. As you went into the space, it was a meditative space, so you could hear the diaries going in the background, and you could also see the changing seasons in the videos in the windows. Roger was trying to put us in the center of his story. Next slide, please. And then the other contradictory story that I've been thinking about is, while the museum closed, I was still teaching. And I decided that my Art on Campus class could go ahead. Well, one of the places for my Art on Campus class is the iconic view of the bell tower at the University of Kansas. And it's quite beautiful. And it has real bells. So there aren't too many of them in the United States that have real bells. And we have a distinguished professor, Carol Lanier. There are 53 bells in this bell tower. Always a sight, next slide, please. Always something that the students look forward to, because our ritual is that you pass through the bell tower and walk down the hill, and that's your ritual for leaving the bell tower. Again, this is a World War II memorial. So these contradictions of the joyful World War II memorial and Relocation Luncheon were in my mind. Next slide, please. Here it just shows you that KU decided they were going to build this bell tower, and that happened in the 1950s. At the very time that I was preparing for this, we were also going through many of my family's papers. Next slide, please. And lo and behold, my sister brought me this envelope, and it said, KU Memorial Bell, dedication, 1 bell for John. John Taylor Dyatt was my mother's brother, and he died in World War II, and his name is in the bell tower. So here I was in the middle of this contradiction, celebrating, mourning, considering stepping back. And I feel that that's really the challenge for all of us right now, how to bring our personal stories, our personal selves together. And then the death of George Floyd. So I want to show you a very short clip from what I think is maybe the new direction in what needs to happen with memorials. I don't have an answer, but when George Floyd endured the last 9 minutes and 29 seconds of his life, we all thought about what it meant to breathe. And I think one of the most moving vigils that I saw was the one that KU did virtually. And so I've clipped a new performance that happened inside the memorial, the World War II memorial, written by Darren Kennedy. So I'll hope that we get to that. It's later, Keith. Yeah, right there.
You here on this hill, this second Oread, this rising place above the Golden Valley. Your mind sharp with intellect, pierced with talent. You have come here to the Jayhawk's nest and followed trails made possible by the same strength that holds that throng of spirits aloft. And you have waited to be heard, to be seen, to be called into community, to be made at home and be celebrated. You are not crazy when you say you have been shunned. You are not lying when you say this school must do more. You are not imagining the attacks and your exhaustion. Let that same crucible scorching the nation also bring its heat here. And let us scoop something new out of its ashes. A place that knows this land we learn on, this land that has seen genocide and war and wagon wheels and free soil, that this school set upon it will not turn away from the 2020 burning, the sweating, the throng of Black spirits. That somehow we will fashion a place worthy of you and every bit of liberated humanity that you possess.
So I wanted to share that as a way of thinking through how we intensify and revivify the monuments that we have, and also just to bring us into the current moment. So thank you.
Oh, Saralyn, thank you so much. That was powerful. Thank you. Much more to explore in all of this. Iega.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I am equally excited to be here, actually elated to be here with all of my esteemed colleagues. And so thank you so much for inviting me. And even though I'm not in Salina, I often feel like I am of Salina because it's like one of my second creative homes. I spent a lot of time there becoming more of who I am And I just love my community in Salina. So for all of you that are there that I'm not seeing, hello, it's wonderful to be connected in this way. I am really just want to talk to you a little bit about my work, and then I have 2 video clips that I'd like to show you, which will shed light on it. Essentially, to nutshell it, my work is about helping people awaken to their genius, because my life's work is to awaken to my own genius, and I relate the word genius to the word genetics, and that we all are creatures of genetics. And inside of our cellular makeup, there's this gift that we have that I believe that we are to explore and awaken and find in this lifetime. And so my work through dance is to help people through their bodies, through their spirits, and through their minds to awaken themselves to their genius, to their excellence, to their aspirations, to their dreams. And the other part of it is to build community. I'm a child of community, and no one can do it alone. So you've got to be, or I have found in my life that I have to be engaged in community to find that excellence within myself. So you're going to see first a video about Story Bridge community performances. It's work that I'm passionate about as a choreographer. I participate in projects around the country. And then you're going to see a second video, which really points to more of my professional dance work and the work that I create on professional dancers for people to hopefully enjoy. So here we go, Keith. So watch this. I can push, step out the way, push. All of those things that stand in your way that make you less magnificent than you are. So you push that. If you're communicating words and an idea, you have a responsibility to fill that with some type of emotion that you care about. And it's okay, I've been timid and nervous and shy and all those things, but I also have to make a choice to get beyond it because of what it was I decided to do in my life. My name is Kevin Iega Jeff. I am a child of community. You know, people, when I started to dance, I went to my community dance school. And even before that, I danced inside of my junior high school. And I met people that exposed me to dancers who were studying at what I would eventually go to, which was my community dance school, Bernice Johnson Dance Studio. And that's where people take you as a raw talent, you know. They stretch you out, they push your feet down, they teach you how to move and just kind of build upon your gifts when you just didn't know what you were doing at all. So you need people to expose you to your gifts, you know, to help you explore your genius. We all have genius, we all have genesis. We come from Genesis, you know, so we have genius to explore. And I had wonderful people in my community that helped me to do that. So it's organic that I continue that work. I started out, as I said, in the arts and community, and so I'll always be committed to that. Stories are powerful, you know, and we all have stories, and it's one thing that I think we undervalue, which is stories, you know, and our connect, because we can find our value through stories, our purpose through stories, our commonality through stories. We can celebrate our difference through stories, and again, through that difference, find a oneness. And I just think we spend a lot of time worrying about finance and, you know, and power and politics and all of that, but you really can't shape those things effectively if you don't know who you are in creation. So I think, you know, that's a hard question because we're so busy being busy that we seldom take time to slow down long enough to value ourselves. So a lot of people are walking around with a lot of fear. A lot of folks are walking around with hatred that they haven't really analyzed to understand what the root of that really is. And so we're projecting dislike or hatred upon other people. And the thing that I love about the arts at its best, you know, is that it can point you to self in a way that helps you embrace other people. And so it's difficult for me to say, how do we as a country, how do we as communities change that, you know, really understand the importance of valuing that. You know, the only way that I know I do value it is when I slow myself down enough to really engage with other people in a human level, to exercise humanity, to spend time with people and to talk to people and to get to know who they are and where they come from, because community performance is an extension of that. And I think when you understand that, then you can understand the magnificence of being engaged in art, because art is about exercising humanity. It's about engaging in humanity. I met Richard about 15, 20 years ago, and he asked me to choreograph a show for him that he was doing in Chicago with CPI, and that's how I became connected to CPI. We just connected. I love Richard. I love what he does. I love his passion for community performance. I've learned a lot working with him. Even though I've done it prior to meeting him, he's been doing it for a very, very long time, and he's been committed to it in a way that has really elevated the profession to a really wonderful level. So I'm thrilled to be involved. What really moves me all the time is when I sit in a room, whenever we're run, for instance, once we've done a lot of the work, and I get to just sit back and I watch the intergenerational interaction that happens in the room when the work is getting done. I love that because I remember being a part of a show once where the senior citizens were very afraid of the teenagers because they had very little interaction with them, or the teenagers didn't understand the seniors. So we have these divides in our community because we don't have close proximity anymore. And we don't have a process by which to really get to know and value the different ages and all the gifts that brings. So community performance is one of the rare places that you can engage in a truly intergenerational artistic experience. And I just really love that about it. So when I'm in a room and sometimes I don't even realize it, but I sit back and I say, wow, this is just really, really so beautiful to see a mother in the cast holding a newborn, or you'll see someone who's 94 years old, as I did when we did a project in Lithonia, Georgia. There were two 94-year-olds in that cast, and we had everybody in between, and to really sit back and bear witness to how all that just kind of intermixed and happened, it was really, really quite beautiful. Thank you. The next video is Surrender, which is an excerpt from a larger work which follows a dance that we performed in Salina many times, Church of Nations. So I'll let you do your thing, Keith.
We've only prayed that you would see us, not as those who fought their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters at war. That amplified personification of one who bears guilt, but with the knowledge of our challenge and the acceptance of our penance. See us not impatient in our destiny. We open the door to our souls and allow our beings to be seized by those heartfelt things we cannot see. All that we were cannot be changed. See us as we are, human, whole, and creations of God. youth, hope, and creation of God. Our spirits ascend and celebrate, for we have reached the edge of the earth and found it not our journey's end. We have reached the edge of the earth and found ourselves. I only pray that you will see me as one who loves my mother and father and brother and sister, no more. That amplified personification of I who surrender to the knowledge of my challenge and my purpose. For we have reached the edge of the earth and found it not our journey's end. I have reached the edge of the earth and found myself.
All right.
Oh, thank you, Iega. That was just beautiful.
Thank you.
Just beautiful. Well, I'm sure that you are hearing, as I'm hearing, so many interconnecting ideas, words that each of you are using, contradiction and humanity and intertwining. And I look forward to us diving into some of those. And Iega, I want to start with you. In this last excerpt we saw, this beautiful piece, both the choreography and the spoken word tell a story of searching and discovery, of being pulled by external forces to find something within. In a way, it seems like this piece is revealing vulnerability as a form of strength. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it came at a time in my life where I was choreographing this work when my sister was ill, and she was eventually she would pass away, and I didn't know that would occur, but I did feel that I had to trust what was happening and surrender it, if you will, to another power, to another place, to a higher essence than myself. And so it was a very cathartic process for me, because I was considering the connection of spirit, mind, and body inside of my own intentions. And I think as a younger person, which I was just about to enter my 40s around that time, as a younger person, you're prone to control because you have this vision for your life and you want to make it happen. But as you get older, you learn that that has its place and it doesn't, that we are really here to facilitate things that are unknown to us. And so when my sister was stepping into that space of transitioning, which I didn't know she was going to die, but there was an unknown quality around what was happening. And the only way that I knew to deal with it was to surrender and to kind of use my art as a way to figure it out, to just kind of accept what was happening and let it guide me through.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just follow up by asking you and anyone else, Shin-hee or Saralyn, you can jump in too. Are there limits to vulnerability?
Are there limits to it? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think that certainly there are points in my life where I feel vulnerable, and you've got to step up and be courageous inside of your challenges. So I think that once you're aware of your vulnerability in a situation, I find that I have to assess it spiritually and then decide what my intention is inside of it. And inside of that, then you can decide to be proactive, less vulnerable, more assertive. But what vulnerability helps me do, it helps me connect to the most authentic and most useful place of my decision making. So, right, so that I'm not making a decision out of defensiveness. I'm not making a decision out of power and authority. Then I'm making a decision that's based in feeling what the situation is and responding to it, hopefully more appropriately.
That's really beautiful. You're describing vulnerability as like a point of access.
Yeah.
And maybe you stay there, maybe you need to go somewhere else, but that's a starting point. Am I saying that correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I
Very
feel
lovely.
about it. Because for me, it has been really empowering. It has not lessened my sense of power as a person. It has only helped me access it more effectively. Yeah. How do you guys feel about it?
Shin-hee, I was wanting, for some reason, your image of the squares of material, that before you started making came up in my mind, the vulnerability of beginning something. And I was thinking, as Iega was speaking, I was thinking about this word that you're using, access, because vulnerability. So I want to toss this over to you, Shin-hee, because my question really had to do with how the artists in the group were thinking of vulnerability, because when I think of it, I'm mainly thinking how to make myself open. And someone used the term attuned, I believe that was you, Iega, but the attunement that is required to be open to art is also one that you're talking about with integration. So Shin-hee, maybe like you have to be open in a way before you can conjure a new work. You have to let it,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So you mentioning about opening, and since I grew up in South Korea, I was raised in Christian family, and so one of the idea of Buddhism was in my philosophy book, but I didn't necessarily study about it. But when I came to United States, some of the ideas that I grew up with, there's no word in English. So one of the book that I really owe to is Thomas Merton. That one of the book is talking about nothingness. And nothingness is the one that when you are creating, or when you are in the mode of creating, that you don't start with your own ego. It's more like a kind of a empty your mind, and then nature comes through to you and then walk with you. And so nature become, or nature or God become a collaborator with the artist. And so sometimes when I think about art or artist, is very kind of the creator, the powerful kind of a one. But in my sense that I become very vulnerable. Each artwork when I'm studying, I feel like a kind of fear. It's anxiety. It's a good way of anticipation, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know anything about it, and I have to relearn, and I have to rely on to God. And so that is my my art making start with my own vulnerability. That eventually I build up my previous experiences and my own technique. But when I'm studying, I feel like I'm studying all over again, and I feel vulnerable. I become a child, and all, the word of nothingness is very clear to me, and sometimes it's a little bit scary that it's too empty space. But that gave me another strength, that since I didn't know what to do, I just work faithfully my own way, but then I rely on to God. The other part is kind of a collaboration. Yes.
I so relate to that. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Saralyn, I want to ask you a little bit more about this idea of memorial and some of the contradictions. Shin-hee's talking about how something has to start from nothing, or this kind of emptying in order to produce. But so you showed us two very different kinds of memorials. One that is tangible and concrete, even though it is memorializing something intangible like loss or courage or honor. But tell us more what you mean when you offered us the second memorial and suggested that that might be a new way of thinking about memorials.
Well, it's really nice to be in the company of a dancer because I think performance is full of possibilities. Because just as life is fleeting, so are performances.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Shin-hee, just to swing back to you for a minute, so is the apprehension of a work of art. You know, when you revisit it, it is not the same. Mm-hmm. So, Paul, I do want to respect, I love your question. Your questions are always fantastic. I love your question because we think, if you said what is fixed at the university, everyone would immediately think of our campanile. But I think that what was moving to me was to think about how we as human beings through art can transform the stories surrounding even these fixed statues, memorials, things that we think are going to like put us into eternity somehow. We're all grasping for that. You know, it's why we name things after people. And so in answer to that, I think I'm sort of tinkering around in my own mind with immortality and mortality, and how art is really, I mean, that is such a central question to art. And could it ever be possible that a community, a whole community, or a global constellation of communities could think about our lives together as ephemeral on the earth? And so I'm thinking about memorials less as fixed. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but being vulnerable even to the loss of fixedness.
I love that. I love that. I've lost a few people in my life, and what I've come to understand is we lose them on the earthly plane, but they're always there with us in spirit. So this kind of finite thing that we're thinking about in life, to me, doesn't exist anymore, because I really see it as part of a continuum that spans my lifetime, that extends beyond my lifetime. And I also feel my work as an artist is really laying the foundation for future lives that will come forth. And in some cultures believe that we will come forth again. And I kind of share that belief that there's a regenerative element to living, and that we'll pass through again with kindred spirits that we'll see again and we'll share with again. You know, so my thinking, because of going through that process with surrender, really what that really opened up myself to this idea of being a conduit. There's this continuum of energy, which I also think that Shin-hee spoke to when you talked about just kind of being open and what was the word that you used again?
Nothingness.
The nothingness, yes. You know, that when I go into artistic process, my goal is to wipe my slate clean. I mean, I may train in technique, I may think about content and whatnot, but when I go into the creative process, I want to be a vessel into nothingness so that I'm used as a conduit for creation or God to have come through what would come through. And then the last thing I'll say about that is that what connects me, and that often connects me to the ancestors in a way where what you're speaking about, Saralyn, is that the ancestors are there, and that's the continuum of life force and energy that is beyond a statue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to go a little further with this idea of what community could do together. And Shin-hee, I'm thinking about you talking about the voiceless, the marginalized, and we keep circling back around to the power of stories. And that seems to be our native language, all of us. And we are constantly translating our experience into stories. But I wonder what you think about some of the ethical issues in storytelling. And I don't know if ethical is even the right word, but who gets to be the storyteller? Is that authority confirmed, or does the story challenge that authority? Who's the intended audience for the story, or who has access to it? How do these relationships fit within existing hierarchies or push against? Whose stories are not told? How are all of you thinking about that in your work where you are? Saralyn, do you want to jump in there?
I'll just jump in and then try to back out, because I feel like I have to give a crack from our first session into this session, because we're talking a lot about listening, and I'm the person who is I am the reader of the art and the stories mostly. I have my own stories to tell, of course, but mostly in my life. And Paul, I know that you in some ways are the listener and you're the questioner. And so I just want to put a word out there for stories need both. And a word out there that says we are not only called in community to tell our stories. We're called in community, I think, to learn to listen and see them from these different lenses. That is something only art can do.
Great.
It teaches us how to look through these different lenses. So just swinging back around to the stories and to the authority of stories, which is such a good question. Who is listening? Who is speaking? How long will you listen to someone else's story until it is deeply in your heart?
Yeah, I think everyone's entitled to their story and to tell their story. So when you asked, I think you asked the question about who gets to tell the story. I think everyone gets to tell their story. They should have the freedom to do that. I think my concern is when voices are muted deliberately, then that's when we're in trouble. Because the beauty of a story is that if it's engaged in the energy of the spirit, then it's going to ring true or it's going to ring false, either to the speaker sometimes, and definitely to the listener. And I think that informs, or it gives us the opportunity to respond to our own stories with truth if they're not based in truth, or to be lifted by the truth if they are. And if we're listening, then we're going to be transformed by that truth. Eventually, sometimes not, but sometimes over time, with wisdom and experience, then the story does help to transform us. So I'm more concerned about just making sure we have avenues where people can tell their stories, can share their stories, especially if their voices feel muted.
Shin-hee, tell us about that in your work, because I know that's such an important idea.
Yes. The story is the speaker and the listener, and then I think that can be shifted too, that it is reciprocal. So it create a dialogue that when you're listening to somebody's, then you reflect yourself and it respond to that. And so that is kind of one mutual understanding when your stories are told and when you are responding to it. But then the other one is that also you can think about the time that past, present, and the future. Sometimes some sound can be muted in the present time, but then it will be heard next time. That is the one that the power of art, that seemingly it was voiceless at this moment, but we just learn from the past and then interpret it. We just try to listen to it. And then also it can be heard in the next generation. So the life goes on, but then the awareness of the muted voice, the silence, we have a more attention to do that, then we become a good listener. And then when Iega was making about the movement, and then also Saralyn, you're working at the museum, and then we don't necessarily, I mean, we are all acting in our own areas, but we are working with empty space. We are working with a void. We are working with a background. And so sometimes it looks like I'm the one that creating something, but I can be also in the negative space. The word is positive and negative. It's not necessarily a good word, but when you are positive, also you respect the negative space, and the other way around. So I think it is a reciprocal.
Thank you. Well, we're nearing the end, and so I'm thinking that maybe a way for us to bring our conversation to a close is if I could ask each of you to think about your own story in the context of the tradition that you come from or the institution that you work in, and thinking about how what's next for you, or what you're moving forward with in terms of locating yourself in that context. What is resonant for you from the long tradition that you come from? What are you pushing against? What's inspiring you? What's challenging you? Just a few words from each of you, maybe, to bring us to a close. Iega.
Okay, let me see. At this stage of my life, I've spent a lot of time examining the racial implications of living in America and living in the world. And what I'm clear about is the fact that we are all human beings, and we are all connected, and we all evolved out of the human diaspora. So even though we have a racial constructs that shape society, it is clear to me that those constructs are designed for power, to maintain a certain sense of power, authority, security, if you will, insecurity, perhaps, to deal with some of the insecurities that we feel as people. And even though I think that those constructs must be deconstructed in order for us to find our oneness in humanity, I think I'm really, really excited about and interested in the work of deconstructing, so we can get to the commonality that we share, and also the exuberant things that are so different, because it's that difference also that strengthens us as well. So, and that's a very different place than I was as a younger person growing up in the racial construct and really being wounded by it in some ways. And art has really healed me and provides a place for me to find agency in other human beings. And so that's what I see myself doing. In a concrete kind of way, one of the things that my company is focused on is building an institutional home for our work. And so that there's a safe place where people can go to use art as a refuge to find themselves and to really build upon humanity. So that's what this third chapter of my life is all about. That's what I'm focused on at this point.
Oh, thank you. Shin-hee, what's ahead for you?
Well, just I briefly talk about myself that Iega, last Sunday you mentioned about you had the anger, and then that transformed into the art. And in my case, I was a very sad person. I was Christian, but I thought my life is so sad. And so I thought my salvation is in heaven. But when I start to art, at the time I didn't think about myself as an artist. When I did art, when I create, I feel like salvation is in this earth. I don't have to wait for the heaven. And so I feel like this is the freedom that I have, and this becomes my voice. And so it's kind of a relearning myself too. But I think I will continue, and then my art will evolve. But some part is a mystery. I like to show my artwork as the witness of God's salvation, because I was saved by art. So I want to share my experience that how become assertive person rather than coward and just confined in my own cocoon, which is language. I become much more freer because I found my voice in art. And so I'm going to use my handicap, my language, as my own freedom and then share through my art. So I don't know exactly. I will continue, but it will evolve.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Saralyn.
I love so much that you've both spoken about courage today, because the symbols of courage that we have are not the ones that we started with talking about vulnerability. It's a different kind of courage.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
And it just resonates. I wasn't thinking about this when Paula first asked the question, but I'm thinking deeply about it now. That what am I thinking about? I want to be more courageous, but not in this triumphant way.
Sure.
I want to be more courageous in small ways.
Yeah.
And courageous even to be awake all day.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
to let the hurt and pain and sorrow in and be able to transform it for myself. And just to go back to the topic of this, and to let the healing occur as it will.
Yes.
In time.
In time.
So patience and courage, perhaps.
Well, what beautiful way to end. Thank you all so much for sharing so richly, sharing your work, your ideas, your vulnerability, your generosity with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Paula.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.